Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, owner of the company Horns of Odin. As always, before we start the show, I do have to plug our Patreon. I say it every single week. It's the lifeline to the show. It's how we keep on going. It's literally how the show can keep being made. Over on Patreon/Nordic Mythology podcast, you get access to the entire back catalogue that you can't get anywhere else. And that's over 260 episodes at this point, with some absolutely amazing guests. You also get any bonus episode we do, such as the Viking Smut, which is always a lot of fun, where myself, Mags, and Claire read some amateur Viking erotica. You also get all the Q&A episodes that we do with our guests every single week. They sometimes are another full episodes on occasion, where the guest just hangs around and we'll do another hour. Sometimes they're 20 minutes. But if you like an episode, have a look on there, and there's going to be that bumper part to it. If you can't support, obviously, on Patreon, just a 5-star rating, positive review wherever you get your podcast. Maybe somebody else will find the show. And anything else, just like and subscribe, and little bell notification on YouTube. It always helps on there. But let's get into today's show. We've had a week off, so it feels new and fresh again. So first, I will introduce my lovely co-host and in-house archaeologist, Mags Havgar.
Hello. You kind of brought your phone into the screen before you introduced me. I was like, oh, we've had a week off. He's going to forget now, and you didn't. Nope. I'm so sorry for not believing in you.
You should have believed, but you didn't.
I should have.
It's all right. I understand. I've done it enough times. And I'm gonna the guest today is a man from my own neck of the woods, a familiar accent, an advocate of Yorkshire, and it being the God's own country, or county, should I say. Can't even get that right. But our guest today is Dan Coultas. Dan is a PhD candidate at the Institute for Medieval Studies at the University of Leeds. His research focuses on neurodivergence in Old Norse, Middle High German, and Middle Welsh literature. He has an MA in medieval studies and wrote his dissertation on perceptions of queerness in early medieval Scandinavia. So all the things that are going to piss a certain group of people off.
Yeah, that's me.
But then also make other people very happy. But why are we always giving attention to the naysayers? Because personally, I'm like, this is the type of aspect, like stuff that I'm missing. This is the kind of stuff I want to see more of.
No, but it's fun knowing. Like, it doesn't upset me when people call us names, but I find it fun to kind of
poke the bear.
Yeah. There was a guy last week saying how basically accusing of us trying to rewrite history with some of the guests.
Oh, so he hasn't listened to the podcast then?
No, comparing us to when the BBC makes a documentary and changes the skin color of characters, or adds people of color into the army of the Anglo-Saxons. And I was like, you've not listened to us at all, have you?
No.
Yeah.
But Dan, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming back. I really enjoyed our last chat. So if you want to go and listen to that, please do. So,
yeah, good to be back. I was just thinking there when you were saying about annoying people. I'll be interested to see if I get more abuse for talking about autistic Odin than I got for talking about queer Odin.
I feel maybe I have. I have a slight suspicion that you might not necessarily get as much hate, but that you might get a lot of actuallys.
Possibly. We'll see.
Yeah. From perhaps slightly neurodivergent people themselves. I don't know.
Yeah, I would guess the queer one would upset people more.
I mean, it did upset.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. We've done a few episodes, and the latest one with Basil, people just look at Basil's picture, they look at the topic, and then they just assume it's going to be a certain, I don't know, discussion that it absolutely isn't. But you can't force people to listen to things and to listen to them all the way through. And even then, people hear what they want to hear a lot of the time too.
Yeah.
Sure.
But yeah, we'll get into this in a second. Our long time listener in the chat asked us if we could shout out their friend Angeles from Colombia. So we're going all the way to Colombia, and YouTube is watching for the first time. And that reminded me, I did want to mention a lovely gentleman who came to see me at the MCM Comic Con that I was at this weekend. And he came up to the stall and he was like, I love the podcast. He was quite shy. He was like, I love the podcast. And I was like, but I get really shy if anyone ever says that, because I'm not used to it. The show's not, it's not that big. So I get right nervous then. So I'm like quite nervous. I'm like, thank you. And he's like, oh yeah, I really like what you're doing. I'm like, thanks. And I get
then you can be like cute and awkward together.
Yes, I get like quite nervous about it. The gentleman's name, I'm 99% sure it was Tom. I wrote it down in my phone, so if I got it wrong, I do apologize. But it was a really sweet moment. I always appreciate little things like that. So shout out to Tom.
Are we becoming like slightly niche famous, Dan? Like super duper niche? Like
in a very small
like
group of
X
people.
tier? Maybe?
Maybe not even that.
Oh, man. Well, we got 3 more letters in the Scandinavian alphabet. So.
Yeah, those ones.
We're famous. But speaking of fun little quirks, like as a fellow researcher in training myself, Dan, when I saw today's topic, I got immediately very curious because I was like, that is so cool. And then my next thought was, how? How do you do that?
It's interesting because there's not a lot of secondary literature. When I started on this project, I knew that nobody else was doing, neurodivergence in Norse literature. There is now someone else doing it, and there's a project at Oxford as well, which so it's starting to get out there now. But then I sort of looked around and I realized very, very few people are doing this in literature at all. The approach is, I sort of, felt a bit like that scene in Blackadder where they, they give him the map and ask him to fill it in as he goes along. Because that's kind of been the approach. So the way that I've gone about it is I've sort of, with a friend of mine, Debbie Gregory, we've developed this concept of neurodivergent coding. So this is born out of, you might have heard of queer coding. People have heard of queer coding. So that's where effectively sort of 20th century, to get around censors and things like that, we had queer coded characters in popular media, but they weren't explicitly, any kind of queer, but they were coded that way.
So that if you know, kind of like if you knew about it, you could pick up on it. But if you didn't, it would pass through like censorship standards.
Exactly. So they'd never explicitly say they were gay. They'd never be in an open relationship or anything, but the clues were there. And actually, we realized that this is kind of happening in pop culture stuff with neurodivergence as well. You can see neurodivergent coded characters. So, I mean, I'm going to use an example I hate because this might be controversial. I really don't like The Big Bang Theory, but it is a good example. For example, if anyone's seen Community, there's Abed in Community. He's a neurodivergent coded character. An example that I actually put into my writing recently was Psych, if anybody's seen that. Sean Spencer, psychic detective, who uses his hyper-observational skills, which are, that's neurodivergent coding. So getting
would that be different to? So I'm reading a lot of Stephen King books at the minute, and he has Holly Gibney, who is a character who has Asperger's, but it's explicitly said that she has Asperger's.
Well, then it's not coding because it's
is that the difference that if it says it, then it just is.
Yeah, if it's explicitly stated, then it just is. If they're coded, but they don't say it, then it's coding. Now, obviously, when we're looking back at 13th century literature, nobody is writing sagas where they're saying this character is autistic. Like that's not, that's not there. But we can take that coding principle and apply it to these sagas and this other 13th century literature and look for those same things that make a character neurodivergent coded and read it in the saga literature. So that's broad brush. That's my approach.
That's really cool because also like, I'm sorry if I'm like immediately throwing all the stuff that I'm sure that you've heard 1 million times at you. But like the concept of, neurodivergence, I feel currently has finally become a bit broader and isn't just kind of psychiatric deficiency as it might, previously have been considered. But it's a relatively new concept, especially when we're thinking, way back in centuries. So like, I mean, I am of the opinion that, of course, neurodivergence has always been there, whether we're talking like what we currently call ADHD or autism or any combinations of all of the umbrella terms. But like, how do you, where did my question go? Speaking of neurodivergence, what was my question? Yeah, how do you kind of deal with that tension, I guess? Like using principles that have been created in like the late 19th century, I would assume, to literature that is from, well, way before.
Yeah, no, of course, and that's always going to come up. Autism was first sort of codified and looked at by Hans Asperger, obviously quite a controversial character now because of his links with the regime in Nazi Germany, and actually his reasons for diagnosing kids as autistic was to basically decide how best to dispose of them. But he was the first person to start doing it. And then, ADHD is much, even more recent than that. But just because that's when these things were first codified and first sort of researched doesn't mean that they didn't exist before that.
Yeah, exactly.
Left-handedness wasn't really talked about until the 1920s. There's always been left-handed people. Now, obviously, in the press at the moment, again, without wanting to get too political, we've got certain people trying to push wild ideas like, autism being caused by paracetamol, which was actually invented after Asperger did his work. So that's impressive. But yeah, my approach is that neurodivergence has always existed. Where there's been typical brains, there's always going to have been atypical brains. Now, as you say, whether that manifested in the ways that we now call autism, ADHD, I also include acquired neurodivergence as well. Not everybody does, but I include like PTSD as neurodivergence as well.
Okay, cool.
And that's an area where there has been more work. There has been work on historical trauma. An article like Achilles in Vietnam, which was really kind of groundbreaking in that area. So people have looked at it that way. But yeah, I'm going to come up against people saying, oh, it's a modern concept. You're just, applying it to the past and it's anachronistic. But the way I read it, the coding is there. And
sure,
logically, there will always have been variation. So,
oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I have multiple thoughts.
Go ahead, Dan, because my brain is spinning wildly. So please take the floor before I start yapping.
I guess one or the first is, I imagine a lot of these things are noticed more today because children spend a lot of time in a school situation or like an academic situation where you're supposed to conform to like a normal regime of sitting quietly and learning rather than kind of being out and doing things with your hands and more physical kind of learning and tasks. So how would that compare to, say, something in the Viking Age where that doesn't exist? It's the lifestyle and culture is so different that you don't have this area where kids have to, or people don't have to sit and just focus. So it probably maybe doesn't come up as much because it's not kind of required to have that, that straight focus. And if you don't do, you get a slap on the wrist.
Yeah, well, actually, interestingly, so one of the texts that I'm sort of focusing on is Old Saga Skallagrimssonar, or quite often gets anglicised as Egil Saga. So, yeah, people might know it as Egil Saga, but Old Saga Skallagrimssonar. And this is brilliant for looking at neurodivergence because our main character, Eik, or Egil, it follows his entire life, and it starts with his childhood. And something that's really interesting is that you're saying about, obviously kids didn't go to school, but what we do have is actually there's a sort of trope amongst children in the literature of them being what's referred to as kolbiter, which literally translates as coal biters. And it's like a derogatory term that was used for children to imply that they were useless because they just sat around by the fire, literally biting the coal biters. But Eik doesn't do that. Like, he does the complete opposite of that. To the point where actually, like, his dad, Skallagrim, would probably have much preferred it if he was a coal-bitter, just sitting around by the fire. Because what he does instead is things like stealing horses and riding to parties when he's 4 years old and getting drunk. He does things like he gets involved in some ball games. And when he loses the ball game to an older child, he goes and gets an axe and kills him. So actually, we can see that there is a stereotype of kids should be sat by the fire, behaving and not doing anything. And then Eik is like doing everything but that. So that's, something that I've picked up on and I've really sort of really looked at.
Was there a dog barking then?
Oh yeah,
I was wondering that too.
It's okay.
That is my dog. It's their tea, so they're probably shouting for their tea. Sorry about that.
What are your dogs called?
They are called Frecky and Gary.
So, nice.
Obviously.
No, don't
Both
worry.
Dan and I have a dog each, so we know the vibe.
Yeah.
We love dogs. It's just if the listeners heard them, I figured if we just addressed it, then
I should address that.
It's more. No, it's more fun. And they've had their dinner now, so they're happy. Right. Yes, I mean, coal biter. That's an insult that I'm going to use for one of my friends at some point. So
he was an active kid then.
Yeah, very much so. And doing things, way like developing much faster, which again, like today, that's seen, that's recognized as a neurodivergent trait, is his early development. He composes skaldic verse at 4 years old, which, for anyone that's had a go at composing skaldic verse, doing it at any age is impressive, but doing it at 4 years old, if that's not early development, then I'm not sure what is.
Could this not just be any parent who looks at their own child who is like, oh, well, little Debbie, she can do the alphabet forwards and backwards at 9 months.
But he does this publicly because he's stolen a horse and ridden to a party to do it. So it can't just be, and actually his dad hates him for it as well. So it's not going to be his dad posting him being like, oh yeah, little Eik, look how well developed he is. It's like he's going against his father to do these things.
Okay, so it's not told in in a boasting way from family members or anything. It's more kind of just like laying out what was happening and that the dad was to understate it, a bit exasperated maybe. Yeah,
and that can be a feeling that parents of neurodivergent kids have. That's that can be a thing. I'd say that Skallagrim, he takes it a bit far in his resentment for it, to the point where later on they play another ball game and Skallagrim kills Eik's friend. So, their relationship isn't good. Yeah, their relationship is bad.
Yeah, that's a way to make your kid hate you.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And, he does kind of something else he does is he punishes Aik by not talking to him for an entire winter. Now, if Aik is, as you know, neurodivergent in my reading, I mean, I would argue he has hyperverbalism. He wants to talk all the time. That's what he does. So what is the cruelest way to punish someone with hyperverbalism is to ignore them and not talk to them for an entire winter.
Instant rejection sensitivity dysphoria.
Yeah, exactly. And as a result, Aik takes the first opportunity he can to get away from Iceland, which happens when, fortunately, his brother comes back and he manages to convince his brother to take him off a Viking. And that kind of marks the end of his childhood at that point. I mean, he's 13, but, in the 13th century, but obviously the saga is set sort of 9th, 10th century. So 13, yeah, you're an adult now, go off and raid Norway, it's all good.
Yeah,
Maybe was he ever a child if he was stealing horses, drinking and murdering people at 4?
Yeah, I mean, say, a very, very early development. And yeah, his dad literally says, the line he says to him is, he says he can't go to the party because he's insufferable enough when he's sober. So he's obviously got a track record for drinking already.
Wow, okay. Yeah, he's got a name for himself.
Yeah. But yeah, he rides to the party. He composes verse, which is celebrated by the other people at the party. But yeah, his dad just not impressed. Yeah, triggers his rejection sensitivity, drives him away.
Yeah,
I wonder if people did drink much earlier. Obviously, we had Simon Trafford on to talk about mead the last time we recorded, and I imagine alcohol was much lesser in percentage. They wouldn't necessarily have waited for it to get to 12-13% like a lot of the stuff we have, and I guess they would have known it would be clean because it's been through some sort of fermentation. So I wonder if children did drink and it was just
probably
a normal thing.
I think, yeah, children, I mean, this is a whole topic for it. You could have a whole other episode. I think children did probably have some low alcohol content drink, because as you say, this whole sort of, clean water and stuff. Although, personally, I think that might be a little bit of a misnomer, because the reason that water's dirty today is because of industry and stuff like that. If you're drinking from fresh streams up in the hills, probably not so much of an issue. But the point is that it makes a point about him being drunk and him being an insufferable drunk, which does, I think, mark him out for children.
Yeah. And I do think today we have a very different conception of alcohol consumption, because we have, the way we approach just development, and the concept even of childhood is a fairly modern one. The fact that a section of your life is for when you're supposed to be innocent and not have to do stuff, and then you become a full person. That's a fairly new thing. And also we've done medical research that's shown that, a lot of alcohol consumption before a certain age can develop, it can inhibit your development. But they didn't necessarily have access to that. But then at the same time, they also didn't have akvavit yet, or aquavit and really hard liquor in the same way that we do. Probably, we talked about with Simon. So
yeah, they didn't have any distilled liquor.
No.
Yeah. So I agree with both of the Dans that they probably have access to it, but I think also just drinking as a concept is something that we think we know what we're talking about when we're talking about drinking in the Viking Age, but I don't know if we actually do.
No.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
It would be impossible. It'd be impossible to tell the culture and thoughts around it. So okay, back to neurodivergence. Are you able to see different quote unquote types within the literature, or is it just there's something a little spicy going on here?
Yeah. So my approach is not to try. I'm not doing retrospective diagnosis, because that is fraught with moral issues and things like that. So I'm just looking at coding. I am splitting it. The only way I'm splitting it is between developmental neurodivergence. So that's the stuff like today that we'd include, like ADHD and autism would be the two main ones. And then acquired neurodivergence, which is today we talk about PTSD and things like that. So that's the only kind of
stuff that's happened to you, and that's why your brain shifts.
Yeah, exactly. So it's I only differentiate between neurodivergence you're born with, neurodivergence that happens, through life. But obviously, when I'm looking at what the coding elements are, I'll be looking at modern diagnostic criteria for ADHD, modern diagnostic criteria for autism, PTSD, whatever it happens to be. But when I'm looking at my characters, I'm just looking at them as these are the elements that contain this coding.
Okay,
right.
So it's taking the modern kind of term and description, diagnosis, and applying that to the literature of what could or could,
but not necessarily to the characters themselves.
Yeah. Basically a neurodivergent reading of the text rather than, my conclusions when I come to the end of this project are not going to be Aik was autistic. That's not going to be that I draw. But it will be that you can read these elements of coding and you can use that to understand the story. Something else that's kind of like my gold standard, I find it, is where I can pinpoint where they're considered divergent within their own culture and community, where I don't have to use the modern stuff. Most of the time I do have to look at traits, but sometimes, so for example, I've also done a chapter on Hagen in the Nibelungenlied. And there's a few points in that story where other characters literally say things like, "Oh, that's just how Hagen is, don't mind him." Like that sort of thing. So clearly they are recognized.
Yeah, that was going to be kind of where that was leading to, was this idea: do we have terms in the original source? And I guess you don't, obviously feel free to steer from just Old Norse. I know you're looking at kind of Welsh and German. Feel free to chip in and out of those as well. The whole topic is extremely interesting.
Yeah, so we don't tend to have any specific terms. There's no Old Norse word for neurodivergent. Same with Middle German. We don't get them saying this character is this, but what we do get is little clues, little things like where other characters are saying things like, so again, when Aik is a child, we get this line in the narration that says that basically other children were told just to yield to him. Why? So, as I say, we had it with Hagen. Oh, that's just how Hagen is.
Kill you with an axe, that's why.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is probably a good reason to yield to him.
Don't go play with little Hegel, because he won't come home.
Yeah. I mean, that whole thing kind of leads into this sort of strong sense of justice. This is something that's coming up throughout all the that I'm looking at. So it's a neurodivergent characteristic that it's been referred to as justice sensitivity. So, we've already talked about rejection sensitivity. A very, very similar concept is justice sensitivity, which is where neurodivergent individuals tend to have this really, really strong sense of justice. And obviously, I wouldn't say this in my research, but I first-hand experience of it. So I'm neurodivergent myself, and I do get really kind of wound up when I think of injustice. And like I have to fight that injustice, and it can be over, a silly, trivial thing, but this is wrong. We have to. And I'm seeing that a lot with my characters here. So Ale, obviously we have it where he feels like he's been treated unfairly in the ball game, then goes and gets an axe. But there's other times as well where, like later on in the saga, he's already a rich man. He's been raiding, he's got his estate, but his wife's father dies and he believes she's entitled to some estates, but it all goes to the husband of her sister. And even though he's been outlawed from Norway, he's like, no, I'm going to go talk to the king because this is my land and I'm entitled to it. And then obviously it goes very badly. He ends up having to flee again. But, you know, he didn't need that land. He's rich. He's got everything he needs. But he's like, yeah, but it's mine. Like, I have to fight for this justice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I relate to that a lot. Not invading places and, you know, forcibly trying to take property. I just wanted to. That's not what I have personal experience with. But that whole, like, I find that the strong sense of justice thing is a fun one, because that's not one that I was really aware of. Also, neurodivergent myself as well, diagnosed as an adult, so I'm kind of like relearning all this stuff, and then I'm like, oh, well, see, now that explains all of those experiences.
Yeah. I mean, I had a similar thing. I was diagnosed whilst I was doing my master's. So that's when I was diagnosed with ADHD. I'd previously been diagnosed with complex combat PTSD. So I have both the C's on my CPTSD.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But knowing about these things does then, you look back at things you've done through your life, don't you? You're like, that's why I did that. That's why this happens. And justice sensitivity is a recognized thing. And it happens with Hagen in the Nibelungenlied. It certainly happens with Ale here. There's other instances. And that's a big one, I find, Grail. And again, this is something that I get quite excited about, because, like, this is a popular saga. Like, I would have thought, you know, a lot of people listening, if you've read any sagas, you've probably read this one. And if you haven't, read it. It's brilliant. Like, I would say, like, if anyone's wanting to get into saga reading, but you don't like the fact that normally the first 20 chapters are just lists of ancestors, Ale Saga is great, because yes, he doesn't get born until about chapter 30, but it's all action then as well. It's what his granddad's getting up to, it's what his uncle's getting up to. It's actual action. It's not just this person was the son of this person, who was the son of this person, who lived at this place, which a lot of sagas are. And, you know, I like that, but I can see why people don't. Anyway, rabbit hole. But it's a popular saga. But there's so many bits of this saga that, like, scholarship's just kind of gone, yeah, he does this, we don't know why.
He's just kind of quirky.
He's quirky. Yeah. He gets described as an enigma. Right. Okay.
I feel like that should be like a diagnosis criteria in and of itself, or a coding in and of itself. If this character is described as being an enigma, or being like quirky, or kind of like unreasonable in like an inexplicable way, and it's like, oh.
Yeah. And neurodivergence, you can use this with AIC to tie all those loose ends up. And I'm not saying, you know, this is the only reading of the text, and this is, you know, I'm definitely right, and this is definitely what the author meant, because it, you know, that we can never make those sort of assertions. But it does seem to tie up a lot of the loose ends. It does explain a lot of the stuff where people have just gone, yeah, he does that, don't know why. It can be explained through neurodivergence. The justice sensitivity one is a big one. But there's also things like taking things very literally, which anyone that knows about neurodivergence will know that that's kind of one of the first things that gets pointed to with autism, is like, people don't, autistic people can't see nuance and they take everything very, very literally. Well, Abe does that. And he gets into fights because of it. So there's a scene where he's fairly newly arrived in Norway. So he's like 13, 14 at this point. He's got separated from his brother because he was ill and his brother's gone off. And he visits this farm, and the landowner says, oh, I haven't got any beer for you, but here's some skyr. Have that. Okay, cool. Everyone's happy. And then the king turns up, and it turns out that he was keeping the beer because he knew the king was coming. Now, the
So
rest
he
of
lied.
in Ael's mind, he has lied. Everybody else understands that what he meant was, I don't have any spare beer. But what he said was, I don't have any beer. And as a result, Ale then basically kicked and ends up, I think killing the host of the party, certainly killing some people, getting into a big fight with the king and queen and having to flee. Because
homicidal neurodivergence.
Yeah. This unfortunately seems to be a bit of a trait with Ale, particularly. He's neurodivergent, and because of that, axes come out.
Yeah, you know what the fun thing is? But like they didn't mean to lie, but he perceived them as lying.
Yes.
And the fun thing in that situation is that as soon as you said, I was like, I don't agree with how he went about it, but like I get where he's come. Like I don't necessarily know if I would get mad the same way, but like I understand the conclusion that he came to.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's it. Like he obviously takes things to extreme in his reactions, but then like he's a Viking, and this is saga literature, and that's kind of, people do take things to extremes, but the neurodivergent coding is, it's more in the how he got there. That's kind of what's important here.
Mm-hmm.
I sympathize with that because I'm not diagnosed officially with anything. I've certainly been alluded to by people close to me.
That's how it starts.
I can completely sympathize with the justice kind of having a more. I hate when people who do the wrong thing get away with it, and I'm like, I have to be the justice here and fix this somehow to my own detriment sometimes. But I also see when you were telling the story, I was like, but he did lie. He might have saved it for the king, but he did have beer. He could have given him some. He's just, and I was like, well, he's just saying that the king's worth more than Diego. And that's how I'd feel. I'd be like, well, clearly you prefer the king to me, and I'd get right upset.
That was my thought too, because I was like, well, he did lie, but I understand he didn't mean to lie. But so he should have phrased that differently. He should have said, I unfortunately can't give you any beer.
Yeah,
but here, have
the
this
king's
instead.
coming later, and I need it.
Yeah, the king's coming later, so I have to pay him. I have to use it for him.
But because he didn't say that, Aik takes it literally, and that's where we end up. And actually, that then sort of starts a whole long-running feud with the royal family that goes on for most of the rest of the saga. And it all comes from that initial injustice. But actually there's another interesting part of that scene that also involves alcohol, actually, because the queen then decides she's fed up with his behavior, and she tries to poison him by poisoning his horn of mead, but he knows somehow. What he does is he perfectly normal reaction, he slices his palm open, as you do, and he then uses his own blood to write runes onto the horn, and then the horn breaks open, and he says, I've used these runes to prove that this was a cursed horn with poisoned mead, and you were trying to kill me, which is interesting. But the reason it's interesting from like my neurodivergent thing is there's been some sort of research done recently looking at magical ability and neurodivergence, and how magical ability can be a way that people in the past have used to explain people being different. Like, he's a bit weird, it's magic. But is it, he's a bit weird, he's neurodivergent? I read a really good book that was looking at Merlin from this perspective, and sort of saying that, for neurodivergent readers, they quite often relate more to the magical characters. And that comes up with Merlin. They sort of did that really well. But for me and my research, I'm thinking you can kind of apply that to Odin as well. And now we get onto the bit that's going to cause people to hate us, because I'm going to suggest that Odin can be read as neurodivergent. And actually,
here's the thing:
I've always thought,
you don't even have to, like, as soon as you said it, I thought of two things, and I was like, well, yeah, that tracks.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the reason that I made that link as well, because obviously this book I read was talking about Merlin, and I've always thought that Merlin and Odin have quite similar traits anyway. But yeah, you just think about it with Odin, and it's like, well, yeah, that tracks, because like, dude is so obsessed with knowledge that he's
His
prepared to hang
hyperfocus
himself.
is
Yeah,
intense.
exactly. Hyperfocus, another neurodivergent trait, or coding to use my terminology, that people know about. Hyperfocus so much on gaining knowledge that he's prepared to hang himself upside down from a tree and stab himself. That seems
Take
pretty
out this eye.
neurodivergent to me. Yeah, these are not typical behaviors. These are
No,
atypical behaviors. Um,
exactly.
so, and again, obviously magical ability. Now he's a god. He's likely to have magical ability. That's kind of an aside. But yeah, the endless quest for knowledge, which is the thing that Odin's like, it's one of his main things, isn't it? It's what he's known for.
It's a special
Seems
interest.
pretty divergent. It is. It's a special interest. It's a hyper focus. So yeah,
Don't we all just hyper focus on the things that we want?
No, but here's the thing
To
that
do
I've
and
realized,
like.
Dan, as an adult after I got my diagnosis, it's not that like neurotypical brains can't do it, but it's just that they usually do it in like a reasonable amount.
Yeah, it's the excess, isn't it? It's
Yeah, it's that I
so-
can't stop.
Yeah, and actually,
Obsess over stuff that I like.
Huh?
I obsess over stuff that I like.
Yeah.
Well,
But
yeah,
then you
but
You're right in there.
I
watch,
straight up-
I watch a lot of them.
I straight up thought that you were diagnosed up until we'd done this for 6 months together, and then you just mentioned as an aside that, oh no, I've actually not gotten a diagnosis. And I was like, but it's so obvious.
See,
Yeah.
I'm probably, I probably have not a controversial thought on this, but I don't necessarily, I think I've said this before, I don't always like all the different labels that things have in the modern day, because I think that
Oh, sure.
I think humans are humans, and I think that giving something a label as if it's an issue or something that's wrong or you have to be diagnosed with, I that always is a little bit uncomfortable with me, in a sense that I think that humans are humans, and it's just that not all humans are the same in any, whether it's a physical attribute or a mental attribute. Of course, they're not
Yep.
all the same. Some are going to be excel in some areas. Some are going to have these little quirks. So, and I think that maybe, obviously, you have like your extremes to anything. You have, particularly when you said about the magic, somebody who has like an eidetic memory, or somebody who just can just pull numbers out of nowhere, or memorize things on an extreme level. Of course, to somebody in the Viking Age, that would be magic. Somebody today,
I still think it's magic, to be completely honest.
yeah, today, if you have somebody who can recite I went to see Derren Brown. I don't know if you know who that is, Mags. I'm sure Dan will.
Yeah.
It's like a British, not really a magician, like a, I guess,
Con artist? No, I'm just kidding.
I guess he is a magician, but it's all like more mental stuff. He actually is one of those people who speaks out against con artists, and he's
Oh, cool.
he says, and even down to like I guess like palm readers, or well, not necessarily palm readers, but people who speak to the dead. He'll do a lot against that. He'll teach people like cold reading of the body and say, look, this is how they do it. This is how they kind of read what you're saying, and just twist it into a bigger story and get information from you. But I saw him live, and he has, whether it's through his training or natural gift, the ability to just recall numbers or memorize like sections of the phone book, and it's super impressive that it borderlines that kind of there's a border there between magic and real. Because even with this, it's like I don't know where to put him because he's not a magician. He's not a car magician. It's all kind of like mental tricks of leading you down a certain path to do things, and that's kind of like this borderline between magic of like, is it magic? Is it not? Because he's not kind of making things disappear, but he's using this heightened mental ability that he clearly is born with.
Yeah. So I'd sort of pick up on a couple of things that you've said there. So the first thing I was going to say is that it's actually kind of a core trait of neurodiversity studies and the new sort of neurodiversity studies within the arts, as opposed to pathologizing medical stuff, that there is no such thing as a typical brain. Everybody is just different. So the categories that we create, they are artificial. Of course they are. Everyone is on.
What? Since when?
Yeah, I know. Everybody is different, and we just kind of group certain ways of thinking together for reasons. Some of those are good, some of those are bad. I've already mentioned what Asperger was doing and why he was grouping people together, and it weren't great. But and for some people though, having a diagnosis is really helpful. Like me and Mags have both said how since we've had our diagnoses, it's helped us to make sense of why we do stuff. And that's actually really helpful in life, because the amount of times where before I knew I had ADHD, I just thought I was a bit shit. I'd be like,
same.
Why am I like this? Why, like, for example, I'll have a pen and then 10 seconds later, I just won't have a pen. And I'll be like, why am I like this? But now I can be like, okay, but that's fine. There's a reason for this. My brain just does this. It's okay. It's fine. But equally,
might be why I would say that might be why I have I script like the way I look at it, and it's probably maybe out of like a little bit of fear of like, clearly I probably know that there is something there. So if I have this mindset of like, oh well, everyone's the same, you don't need to label anything, then it kind of takes away that fear of being labeled as something being wrong. But also, I don't think at any point in my life I've ever felt like there is something like wrong. Like you two say, you thought, oh, why do I do this? Why is this? I'm lucky enough that I've never really had that.
That's
so
great.
So that's why maybe I have that different mindset towards it, because I've never really been in that position where I've been like, oh, why do I do this? I'm kind of like, I'm just me, and I just do stuff. But it's never felt limiting or like at least the way I've gone frustrated with it.
Yeah, and like no one's forcing, or no one should be forcing anybody to go down a diagnosis route, or I have loads of people that identify themselves as neurodivergent because it's helpful for them. But I mean, just trying to get a diagnosis on the NHS these days is, then it's only going to get worse.
I think the NHS probably is probably a lot under a lot more strain, I would assume. But getting a diagnosis here in Norway too is also very difficult. So I also really emphasize with there's also a certain privilege in having access to those tools if you need them. And there's also I also really wanted to stress like exactly what both of the Dans said, that like, it can be really helpful to get a diagnosis, particularly if you are struggling. So I was able to get a diagnosis because I kept burning out and I kept hitting a wall, and finally a psychiatrist took me seriously and got me into the system. But and that's been really helpful for me. But my sister has had the opposite experience where she has felt that this might apply to her as well. But she's functioning, she's doing fine. So she tried to kind of, what should we say, not nip it in the bud, because that would be a weird way of phrasing it, but kind of getting ahead of a potential problem just to see if there was a diagnosis there, since research has shown that there is a strong likelihood that, that this could be a genetic thing, despite not knowing exactly how, but there seems to be, patterns. But she didn't get access to it because she functions too well. So the system's like, no, you come back to us when you can't function anymore. Okay. She was like, okay, cool.
And there's very much a thing, like when I was growing up, the only people who got diagnosed with ADHD were exclusively boys, in my experience, and boys who were disruptive at school and got bad grades. Now, I was incredibly disruptive at school, but I got good grades. So I was eccentric and didn't get a diagnosis because the school didn't care because I was getting good grades. So they let me do weird stuff like stand up and sing songs in the middle of lessons and all sorts of mad stuff because I was getting the good grades. They didn't care. So, things have come along. But yeah, for some people it's helpful to get a diagnosis. For other people, it's not, and it really doesn't really matter which way you want to go with it on a sort of a personal level. I did have a second point that I was going to pick up on. However, ADHD brain has now meant that I've completely forgotten what my second point was. It was something about the literature again.
Yes, I remember.
What were we talking about?
We were.
I went on a little rant, and you mentioned about there being an atypical. They're not.
Yeah,
being
brains.
An brain.
Yeah,
and
the brains being all brains are different.
Yes.
Or there's no such thing as a typical brain.
I was trying to think of what the second part of my rant was that may.
Yeah, it was more back to the literature, but I can't remember what it was now.
Was it with like coding and patterns of social behavior?
Oh, and yeah, pattern recognition. That's what I wanted to talk about. Thank you. So yeah, because
I've gotten used to doing this with my own conversations. Yes. Where?
Yeah, pattern recognition, magical ability.
Right, magic.
Yes, magic, pattern recognition. So this is something that I just sort of started looking at because I was, looking at this whole thing about magic being possibly used as an explanation for neurodivergence. And there's a key part of Eyolf's saga that I look at where he basically predicts that his brother will die in battle, and then he does. And obviously that could be read as magical premonition. But then I thought about, I don't know if people have seen, it's a cop comedy detective thing called Psych. It's an American program. And in that we have this guy called Sean who has this like really, really good pattern recognition, which I think is, what Darren Brown's talking about when he's saying about being able to predict stuff. And he uses it to then trick the police department into thinking he's psychic. Well, that's pattern recognition being read as magical ability. So we've got it there in modern pop culture. So is that also what's happening here with Aik? He predicts his brother's death because basically the king who Aethelstan or Athelstan, because this is that Athelstan, as in King of the Saxons, has the battle plan. So at this point, Aik and his brother are mercenaries in Athelstan's army, as you do. And he looks at the king's plan, he looks at the situation, he's like, if we do this, my brother's going to die, basically. And then he does. But is that pattern recognition? Is he seeing, the lay of the land? He's seeing where, what troops they've got arrayed against them. He's using his experience of battles. He's putting two and two together. That's not necessarily magic, is it? But to someone who doesn't have that pattern recognition and can't process information that way and sort of, be that sort of 3 steps ahead on the chessboard, that's going to look like magic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to me also, there is that pattern recognition of like a general thing, but then also I feel with my own personal experience, I also feel that pattern recognition can kind of almost actually, like you said, feel or seem magical, especially when it concerns someone that you know really well, like a sibling, because you can kind of, even though you can't tell the future, you can kind of predict their behavioral patterns as well. Be like, okay, if this is the battle plan, I have a sense of where my brother's going to go and probably how that's going to turn out, and then blah, blah, blah. And, one thing leads to another, and he did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We're what, an hour and 12. Is there anything we're missing? Because I do want to get to the PTSD side of things, and I wonder whether we keep that for the Q&A.
Well, let's keep in mind then that there's like I think we're actually on like an hour and one in like episode time.
Yeah, we had a bit of a break whilst headphones and stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
but is there anything blaring that we're missing from the I guess born with neurodivergence, not kind of the PTSD kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I could go into loads more examples, but we'd be here for a week. So, I think we've got a flavour there, haven't we? We've got some examples. We've got a general idea of what I'm doing.
I mean, I'd be up for just like a week of that at some point.
Yeah.
If we're gonna do like a live stream, that sounds fun to me.
There is. I was just going to say that. I mean, there is. If we wanted a little bit more, there is one key scene that kind of follows on from this brother dying thing with non-verbalism, which I think is quite tasty. So we could talk about that quickly if that would be of interest. So yeah, non-verbalism. For those who don't know what that is, fortunately, it's what it sounds like. It's communicating non-verbally, and in a lot of neurodivergent people, this can be because they actually, in that situation, they can't speak. It goes beyond they just don't want to. It's they can't communicate. Can't verbally communicate. And there's a really, really interesting scene where this happens. And again, this is another one of these scenes where it's not really been explained by anything else. But this is an explanation we can offer. So there's a feast after the battle. So yes, Aek's brother died, but they win the battle. They actually kind of win the battle because Aek sees his brother dying and does his revenge thing, charges in, breaks the division that had killed his brother, wins the battle for the king. Big party afterwards. Everyone's in high spirits, apart from, of course, Aek, because he's just had to bury his brother. And he sat there with his sword in his lap, sheathing and unsheathing his sword like this. Very, very menacing. Now, if you think about what we know...
So repetitive behavior.
Repetitive behavior, so sort of like a stimming thing for those who know about sort of neurodivergent stimming. But also what could be read as very, very threatening behavior. You're not supposed to take your weapons into a feast under, certain sort of social models and stuff. And he sat there doing this, sheathing and unsheathing it. You'd expect the king to either like try and ignore him or call him out on it or send some heavies to go and get him out because he thinks he's going to cause trouble. But Athelstine doesn't do that. He sees what Aek's doing and he mimics his behavior. He copies him. He gets his own sword out and starts sheathing and unsheathing it. He doesn't start sheathing and unsheathing it. Yeah, well, this is another line.
Does it have some queer undertones?
Well, I'll get to that. I've just remembered actually, he doesn't. I don't think he's sheathing and unsheathing, so I don't get called out in the comments. But he sits with his sword. He copies Aek, sits with his sword on his lap, and then they have a non-verbal communicative exchange. And this is where the potential queer reading comes in as well, because in my reading, Athelstan, he's seen what's going on with Aek. He's empathizing with him. He knows what he needs in that moment. He recognizes that Aek basically feels put out for the fact that his brother's died. Not only that, he told the king this was going to happen. He was right about it. He needs some compensation. Now, normally you'd expect him to be like, come hither, and then make a big scene about giving him something. But he doesn't do that. He copies him. Once they've established trust, he stands up. They both draw their swords. You can see where this might be going from the queer reading. He then puts an arm ring onto his sword. They touch tips. So there we go. There's the queer reading. They touch tips and then literally slide the arm ring from one sword to the other. And then at that point, Aek's like, oh, cool. I've been compensated now. Happy. Done.
And that is what they call docking. In the in the scene.
I was like, I don't even that That is the most explicit coding I have heard in my life. I almost feel like it crosses over to, like, I know of course it's coding, but like it's so on the nose.
Yeah, or on the tip.
On the tip.
So, but yeah, so you've got this. Sorry, go on.
I was gonna say you have the Viking bros all shaking each other by the forearm, being like, "No, he's just looking after his boy. His brother died.
Yeah.
He's just doing right by him. He's been there." And really, it's just he's been there, all right.
It can be all of the above, actually.
It can, yeah. You know, the queer reading of the text is possible. The bro reading of the text is possible, but the neurodivergent reading of the text is possible as well. You know, they've just engaged in this non-verbal exchange. And also Athelstan has empathized with Aeg as well, which makes that interesting as to, you know, how is he able to recognize? You know, could this also lead to then a neurodivergent reading of Athelstan as well?
Mm-hmm.
What a funny little scene that is. Just like getting
it's
your
so
sword
specific.
out, and
it is very specific.
Slide the arm ring over here on the sword.
Yep.
You know what? Good for them. Let them heal, is what I say.
Yeah.
Let the boys touch tips.
Hey.
Yeah.
Why not? Are there any other examples like that? I enjoyed that.
So there are other instances of like non-verbal communication that goes on throughout the saga. I think that's the only tip touching.
Okay.
But that's a very sort
of
of rare...
weird if it was like a thing that happened often.
Yeah, no, as far as I'm aware, that's the only time that this happens. The only other time I've seen this happen, and I assume they must have got it from Ale Saga, is a wedding scene in the Vikings TV series. They pass a wedding ring across two swords. And they must have got that from Ale Saga because, you know, there are no sort of recorded wedding ceremonies. So if you're going to betray one, you've just got to grab bits from everywhere. But yeah, that's the only other time I've seen a ring passed across two sword tips was in a wedding in Vikings. So.
That's the only time you've seen it in a Viking context. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, yeah. Hey, you know.
Not to call you out.
There's certain websites out there. I can imagine. Did you ever watch the Norseman, the Netflix parody Viking show?
Yes.
I feel like they would have done a really good scene with that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of sort of queer coding stuff going on in Norseman. What I love about that is just complete side note, but like from historical accuracy, I think the Norseman is better than Vikings is in terms of costumes, sets, accents. Like it's actually way more historically accurate.
Yeah,
it's hilariously good. I haven't seen all of it, but I've seen it. I've seen the first part of the first season in both English and Norwegian, and I love that they really leaned into the actors just using their own everyday accents for the role in the English version.
It's
I don't understand why
series.
they didn't make more.
I know. I think they should make more.
It just kind of got cancelled, didn't it? Because it kind of it didn't wrap up. There, you know, it led on for more series, but the bros got too upset. I don't think
I don't think it was the bros. I just think but it's the kind of thing that happens in like the UK and stuff also a lot. It's just that, like, you know, this was originally produced by NRK, I think, which is the Norwegian version of the BBC. And it's
so it wasn't
originally Netflix.
Right, okay.
So I got really stoked when I heard that it was available on Netflix because I was like, then I can recommend it to people outside of Norway.
Right. Okay, I'm with you.
Yeah.
I wish they would have carried on because it is really good. I really like it.
And it has a lot of like stupid Scandinavian potty humor in it as well. It was which kind of threw me off a little bit because I was like, okay, guys, we get it. Like, yeah, all right, okay, cool. You're pissing on the okay, whatever. But I agree that like the historical accuracy is almost a bit off-putting, like how well it is, considering that it's a satire. And I'm like, but this tracks?
Yeah.
What?
Okay, so
Speaking of queer and neurospicy coded characters, that show has a couple.
There's plenty in there. Plenty in there.
Yeah.
It has it all. Okay, so I think that wraps up the born
with it.
Yeah.
neurodivergence side. So your research is, is looking back at the literature and seeing by like the modern terms where people could be classed as neurospicy.
Yeah.
Is that
So
right?
yeah. So yeah, that we've kind of wrapped up talking about. As I say, I could go on and on, but I think we've got sort of some good key examples there for people to get kind of a flavour. So yeah, the other side is the acquired neurodivergence. So yeah, what today we'd refer to as PTSD. And there's some interesting stuff on this. So there's already been some research done on Berserkir, and looking at potentially Berserker Gang as a trauma response. And again, this kind of builds on what I was saying about, the articles like Achilles in Vietnam and things like that, where we're looking at, trauma responses, because like, again, this idea that combat trauma is a new thing is, in my opinion, just ludicrous. Like, war is hell. War has always been hell. War is always going to have affected people.
I gotta admit that I thought that was so self-evident that I am kind of stunned by that argument even having been made. What?
Yeah, but you do get people, oh no, PTSD is a new thing. And yes, the label of calling it post-traumatic stress disorder, yeah, that's new. But like, war has never been this like, and again, maybe this just goes back to the bros and the whole like, oh yeah, it's great fun just going around stabbing people. It's not. Like, it's really not. And like, so it's always going to have been traumatic, and that is always going to have had an effect on people. Like, maybe not everyone, different people will be affected differently, but if you see horrible stuff, it's going to mess you up a bit. So yeah, looking at Berserkir as potentially, people who are suffering effects of trauma. I think, we can look at sort of the coding elements in there, and we can see, similar traits. A lack of regard for one's personal safety can be PTSD coding. It can be ADHD coding as well. So that's an element we can see there. Flashbacks causing erratic behavior. That's a big thing with PTSD is when you get triggered by something and you feel like you're reliving a certain situation. Now, to people who obviously don't understand the neurology, when you just see someone, say they've got trauma from fighting battles, and then they putting into another combat situation and they literally go berserk, well, that could be them responding to a trigger, having a flashback, reliving the previous experience, and to the onlooker who doesn't know what that is, that's your berserker rage. And again, I'm not saying this is the only explanation, but I'm saying it's a possible explanation.
Well, that's what I love about, the concept of having different readings, because it isn't about an objective truth. It's about, okay, it's almost like wearing different types of glasses. It's like, I'm not saying this is more right than the other necessarily. I'm saying that you could read it this way. Or could we read it this way? Yes or no? Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm exploring with this whole thing. I'm not saying at any point that, when I say neurodivergence can be used to explain a certain action or a certain, thing that happens in a saga or whatever it is, I'm not saying that's the only explanation. I'm absolutely not, because you'd never win that argument unless you can go back and ask the author of the saga, which we can't, because most of the time we don't even know who they were. There is an argument
there's
with
like
Eos
the
Saga.
linguistic barrier.
Yeah, exactly. Translation, and even when you're reading it in the original Old Norse, we're still doing it through a modern lens. We're still, this is what we think they meant when they said this, but we don't know. So yeah, it's readings, it's interpretations, and yeah, PTSD can be used as a possible explanation for some of these behaviors that we see. One where I find it really interesting is when we get back to the All Father, um, because his trauma is based on a premonition. So does that make it pre-traumatic stress disorder?
No, but the whole, but speaking of, neurodivergent coding, the whole giving yourself anxiety attacks before something happens because you're stressed out about it happening.
Yep, that's a thing.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just made me think of that for some reason.
Yeah, but that can feed into it as well. But yeah, Odin.
The end of the world
has all
is
this trauma.
It's quite a big one, though. I
Yeah.
feel like the
It
end
is
of the
a big
world,
one.
I feel like the end of the world you're allowed to be anxious about.
Yeah.
You absolutely are.
You get a pass on that one. That's kind of like,
yeah,
I get it.
But like a lot of the things that the way he tries to deal with it are quite sort of coded as trauma responses, which is interesting because I say it's trauma from a premonition, but obviously in the context he knows it's definitely going to happen, and then obviously we see it ends up being this sort of trope of the self-fulfilling prophecy, and that what he does to try and stop it actually causes it. But yeah, there's sort of there's trauma coding there, which is interesting.
I think it. Oh, go on, Mike. Sorry.
Okay. No, I just thought that was a really cool example. Also, like in light of what we discussed earlier with Egil's premonition being perhaps an example of extreme pattern recognition, and whether that reading could also be so that you kind of have the born with it and trauma neurodivergence kind of in the same example with Ragnarok and Odin, in that you like whether like the premonition could maybe be read as an extreme form of pattern recognition, that he realizes that like regardless of what I do, I won't necessarily be able to change it, but the trauma response is I have to try.
Yeah.
Like I can't just let it happen.
Yeah. And actually something that's interesting that you've said there about how it could be both, developmental and acquired, is there is research now, and it's again not universally accepted, but there is research that suggests that people with certain neurodivergencies are more predisposed to PTSD. So there is some research to say that people with ADHD are more likely to get PTSD, which, and again, not wanting to be like, well, that happened to me, so it must be right. But that is what happened to me. I've got ADHD, and then I was in traumatic situations, and now I have PTSD. So at least for me, it tracks. I'm not saying that makes it valid or whatever, but, the research is there to support it.
But it's always nice to be validated by research. Whether or not it can be used as a general claim is another discussion.
Yeah,
you'd have to look at. Obviously, you'd have to look at whether people with ADHD tend to then go into more maybe militarized roles.
Yeah,
so I'm sure
maybe
that
they put themselves in that situation more.
Yeah, those. It's not that people with ADHD then get PTSD easier. It's just that you find a disproportionate amount of people with ADHD go into those physical kind of military roles.
Yeah, it could be, we never know the causality, but another sort of counter argument would be, you can put two people can be in exactly the same situation. They could be in the same combat, and one person gets PTSD and the other one doesn't. So there must be that some people are more susceptible than others. Now, whether that's because of their neurotype or anything else, it could be literally anything. But
that's really interesting, because that made me think of some, and again, it's going to sound like I'm generalizing. I don't mean to, because this is going to be one specific example. But that whole potential predisposition, and then also kind of having the neurodivergent tendency of being able to potentially predict your own reaction, but then also not. But like there's this fun kind of thing going on at once where like sometimes you just kind of know how you're going to react to it, and other times it takes you completely by surprise. Because that what you just said now about, you know, developing PTSD and also, you know, taking on military roles. I have a very, very good friend of mine who got diagnosed with ADHD a couple of years after me, actually. And now that we're both diagnosed, we're like, well, no, duh. Actually, looking back at our entire friendship, yes. But when they were in and doing their required military training, they were apparently very, very good shot, and they were kind of advised and recommended to do sniper training, and function as a sniper, and they ended up not doing that and just kind of completing the required training that they had to do the year in Norway, and then we're kind of done. And I asked one time, I was like, why did you, like, not, I don't really care, but I'm just curious, why didn't you end up doing that? And they told me that I just knew that I would be good at it, and I knew that I wouldn't ever recover.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Well, it's one thing being a good shot on a target, isn't it? And another thing being a good shot when it comes to taking someone's life, and that doesn't.
I mean, that doesn't have to correlate with neurodivergence at all. It was just kind of, you know, it's interesting picking up on different traits that are exhibited in those of us who have been diagnosed, and kind of seeing how they correlate, or whether it's just coincidence.
Yeah. But I guess it is, it falls into that acquired part though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, it's one of those things that I think people don't think about enough when it comes to just the past in general, not just the Viking Age. At any point in human history, you know, throw a spear and land it at any point. Don't know why spear, but throw anything, cool. And it just landed at some point in history. You know, where you have warrior cultures and fighting and wars. Not that it stopped today. Actually, we probably have just as many wars today as we always ever had.
You wouldn't know when you look at the news, but actually, war globally has gone down the past 20 years. But nice. You know, it's still bad. It's still bad.
But yeah, we think about PTSD as probably being more of a modern thing. It's probably since like World War II and shell shock, and maybe the understanding and kind of diagnosing.
Diagnosing.
Is a word.
Diagnosing is a word.
Whereas it will have always been there throughout human history. And obviously with Vikings, you get people who think of this, oh, well, you know, they just want to die and go to Valhalla. Bullshit. I don't give a shit what anybody says. They had fear like we do, like anybody does. And in a situation where somebody's swinging an axe at you or a sword or any other thing, you are scared. Because it's a human response, and that's what humans do. And it's not like, oh yeah, hit me with a fucking axe when I go to Valhalla. No, shut up. That's not how it. That's not how it was. I don't believe for a second that's how it was. So therefore, you must also then have like PTSD from that. And I think we don't appreciate the violence and the gore that comes from war in general. For the most part, most people don't see it. And some people may see it on social media and see, you know, Rotten.com.
It's different being an audience than experiencing it.
Yeah, and like you get like the old Rotten.com where you see that's very different to the sounds, the smells, being the person who does it, the guilt that comes with it, but also just we see, you know, sword, axe, you know, medieval style battles on TV, and they're a little bit kind of clean. It's a lot of clashing of metals together. A lot of clashing of metals together. Whereas in reality, you would have bits hanging off people. There would be blood places. There'd be screaming. It would smell. There would be a lot of kind of gruesomeness to it. This sticks with you. It stays with you. I don't care whether you've seen or not. That stays with people. So PTSD would be something that I would say would run all the way through human history.
Absolutely. And this idea of, and again going back to sort of the bros and their views of the Vikings, the idea that like they didn't have the same sort of levels of emotion as us is completely thrown out the window with Eorl's saga when you look at the raw emotion in some of the poetry. Now, whether or not you think that Aik was a real guy and he really composed these poems, but they come from the time period, and like Son of Torek, now, so that's the irrepressible loss of sons, is like the emotion in that is it's a beautifully tragic poem. So this is what Eorl composes after his favorite son's being killed at sea. But there's a lot of intertwined themes between his loss of his son and also Odin's loss of Balder. But it's beautiful raw emotion. So to say that they didn't feel things is clearly bollocks, because just look at the poetry. They did feel things. They did have emotions just the same as us. Which beautifully expressed in this instance, but in other instances that'll be expressed through rage. It'll be expressed through, self-destruction, and a lot of the same things that people have, sort of symptoms of PTSD now will have been happening back then. People won't have understood the diagnosis. They won't have given it the label. But people will have been doing the same things. They'll have been locking themselves away, like Aik locks himself away and tries to starve himself to death, and his daughter tricks him into eating, and then he composes the poem, and that's his way of processing, which is another sort of neurodivergent stim thing. I'm arguing that using poetry as a level of remove to process your emotions. But yeah,
I've never done that at all. No, never.
No.
Have you got some hidden poetry there, Max, that we can?
Dude, I
bring
wrote
out on
so
the podcast
many.
Sometime.
No.
Are they not that kind of?
No. It's more that I am very proud of them.
Okay.
But I was obsessed with writing poetry like in my early 20s. Funnily enough, the period when I was first diagnosed with burnout and depression. 9 years before anyone would realize that there was, those were just symptoms of a bigger thing. But I, speaking of, typical traits of the neurospice, I got so obsessed with writing poetry, and it was so, and I didn't care about necessarily the beautifulness of it. I cared about the expression, that it felt good, and I had fun with it. And because I had so much fun with it, and it was so satisfying and helpful, I can't believe I'm about to say this on the podcast, because please don't, no, I'm going to be, I actually compiled it into a manuscript and I sent it to a publisher. And I got rejected, obviously. But I was like, obviously.
You tell me their name, Max. You tell me their name.
No. Because it was maybe like averagely good at best. That's fine. But I was just like, this meant so much. Like for me, like it felt like so much that I was like, maybe someone else could do it. But I will say the publisher were really nice. They sent me like a whole letter and everything. They thanked me for my subscription or like my submission, not subscription, submission. And they were like, unfortunately, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, yeah.
That's adorable. Thank you for sharing that, Max.
Let's just say I relate to the level of emotion that we're talking about in Eorl's sense, because I think also that time when I wrote poetry was about raw emotion, just like getting stuff out, using words to kind of just like what is happening on the inside.
You know what I would love more than anything?
No, I'm not going to read them to you.
No, if it was slam poetry. I would.
I wanted to do that, but I've never had the guts.
Well, if you ever want to, I would love to listen to you read slam poetry in your turtleneck.
Yeah, you have to learn Norwegian first. because they're all written in Norwegian.
Oh, okay. Oh, shit. Well, okay. You've got me.
So kind of reminds me, I like to point out to people that the Vikings invented rap battles because that's all a fighting is. It's a rap battle. Like,
yeah.
Oh, that I just keep picturing like two Vikings now, and then someone going, "Epic rap battles of history." There's an old callback for anyone who was in the internet and like, when was it? 2008?
I don't know. Do we see any other examples of acquired neurodivergence other than maybe outside of Berserker? Are there anything that kind of strikes a bell? Strikes a
chord?
Strikes a bell? Strikes a chord.
Yeah, strikes a chord. Rings a bell, strikes a chord.
Rings a bell,
rings a bell, strikes a chord. So as I say,
rings a chord.
Yeah, it does something. I've kind of sort of touched upon it with Odin and his responses to his premonition trauma. There's also something that I've come across. I really sort of drilled down into this in my Nibelungenlied chapter, where I'm looking at Hagen, because there's a particular scene where basically he's part of a traveling party, and in their culture it's normal for the woman of the house to kiss the important guests, and she just doesn't want to kiss Hagen because of his menacing aspect, is how it's translated into English. Now what does that mean? There's just something about him. Now, could this be, we've all kind of heard of the 1,000-yard stare. Could this be that this is a trauma response? We know that Hagen he's a grizzled warrior. He's had a lot of fights. Now it could be that he's got a particularly nasty scar or something like that that's not said in the narration, and that's why she doesn't want to kiss him. That's one reading. But is it that he's mentally scarred, and this is potentially a sort of PTSD-like symptom? He's got this 1,000-yard stare that just makes him menacing.
Kind of like there's like a vibe that you can pick up on that it's hard to put into
basically.
words. Yeah.
Imagine that. Imagine you have to kiss every male guest.
Just the prominent ones, but still.
Wow.
Ugh.
Yeah, but to them that was like shaking hands, but weird to us.
Now when they say kiss, I assume it's just like a little,
probably a peck on the cheek, I imagine.
Probably not like tongue.
It's not romantic.
Yeah.
No.
It's a social. I mean, and a lot of cultures still do that, don't they? When they meet friends and stuff, they kiss on the cheeks and stuff. It's not, we don't tend to do it in Britain, and it's not a particularly Scandinavian thing. But if you go to France, it's very common.
Yeah.
I will actually. Yeah. Well, I started thinking about it. We actually do that in my family because of having lived in Florida and Spain. So we've kind of just picked it up from having kind of been immersed in those different cultures. And now we just kind of do it.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I catch myself doing it to another like fully Scandinavian person. Then they're kind of like, what? And I'm like, I'm sorry. Forced to have it.
It depends on who and the closeness and the relationship. Because I'll like my friends or family or friends of family, if I'm close to them, if I give them like a hug, give them a little kiss on the side of the head. It's a little quick one.
That's nice.
Yeah. So it all depends, doesn't it? But what about like just out and out just any signs of PTSD, that kind of things? Like I say, I firmly believe that it will have been rife. Do we see that in any literature, things that you kind of go, okay, this is likely?
So another sort of way of reading it that's been, and again this came up from the Achilles in Vietnam article, is looking at moral injury. So moral injury theory is basically looking at where someone witnesses something so bad or horrendous or whatever it is that it changes their moral outlook. and then they're more likely to do things that before they'd be like, well, I'm not going to do that. That's immoral.
Yeah.
But then they've had some sort of trauma, and then that changes their behavior, and then they're more likely to do things that they might have seen as immoral before.
Every chosen one orphaned boy protagonist in any fantasy series ever.
Yeah. But you see it in the historical literature as well, that after people have been in, a particularly big battle, or they've witnessed a friend dying or something like this, then they start doing stuff that's, they probably wouldn't have done before. Say Achilles does it, Hagen does it. Aex kind of just like it from the start, so I don't think I've really been able to sort of pick it out with him.
He seems to have been kind of on that road from the get-go.
Yeah. But Hagen, I'd say, we do kind of see that. So that can also be read as, potentially PTSD related sort of coding. So we the evidence is there. You've just kind of got to really drill down to look for it, and you've got to apply these kind of different academic theories, because no one was saying, they weren't literally writing in the Nibelungenlied or the Mabinogi or anything like that. They weren't saying, so and so fought in this battle and then he had trauma. Like, they just don't do that. So you've got to look for the signs. You've got to look for how has their behavior changed? What are they doing differently now?
Yeah, but I think that's such a good point, because those types of human behaviors have also been there. It's just now that we have kind of maybe an expanded vocabulary for it, and we're perhaps more used to putting it into context somewhat a little bit. But I'm just kind of, this might not sound related at first, but it made me, because like when you were talking about digging into academic theory and applying it there, then you can actually find the signs, and it's not that like you're making it up. It's actually that it is there, but you kind of got to know what you're looking for, because it reminds me that I had, like 2 generations ago, my grandpa's dad, he trigger warning for anyone listening about suicide, but he took his own life kind of out of the blue, according to family lore, and that really altered the course of my great grandma's life and my grandfather's life. And I remember asking mom about it, like, but what happened? And she was like, we don't really know. But he was described, I remember people who knew him described him as a heavy soul. And I'm like, whoa, okay, that is a loaded term. What does that mean? So like, but I instantly had like patterns of behavior that I could attach to that term, but no one described it. And then she went, well, we've come, not that you can say that, but she was like, there are tendencies that we now assume that he was probably manic depressive or bipolar, which is what we would currently call it. And she was like, we won't ever know. He died in 1938, but but, so like
you get this,
that's a fairly recent example, but like using those type of linguistic kind of markers.
He was probably a victim of the tough it up, you're a boy, pull on your pull up your bootstraps.
He was a theater kid who was made to become an accountant.
Well, that'll do it.
Yeah.
So it's,
but like,
as soon as I learned that, I was like, that explains everything.
Like, he's talking about him being like a heavy soul, and it makes me think of people from that World War II generation who just they seem to function, lead perfectly normal lives, but they just don't talk about it.
No.
What did you do in the war, Grandad? Oh, nothing important, nothing much. And then they die, and you find out they won the Victoria Cross for like storming a machine gun nest or something. But they that heavy soul term that you used, I think you could apply that to people like that as well. That they just don't want to talk about it. They just put it away, and you can see that in these literature characters as well if you read it that way.
Yeah, or like I associate it with kind of like suddenly maybe disappearing or spending a lot of evenings, not necessarily out and about or anything, but like instead of maybe hanging out with your family, you isolate yourself. You sit in a different room, or you like just kind of markers like that where you're like, I think they're fine, but also they just don't talk about it.
Mhm.
And actually, Aik does that in his old age. By the time because that's another great thing about this saga is you actually get his old age as well. Most saga heroes die in their 30s in
Oh,
combat, but
fun!
you get his old age, and in his old age, he just wants to sit by the fire. And ironically, that's the point where he does then become the Kolbiter. He does then just sit and warm his toes
So
by
he
the fire
Benjamin
as an old
Buttoned,
man.
but like
Yeah,
spiritually.
basically. Yeah, kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Don't we always want to retire by a nice warm fire, though?
Yeah.
That sounds.
He does.
sounds-
Just because now I've mentioned it, I have to say it. He does one of my favourite things that anyone does in any saga, though. He is quite happy sat by the fire, but he writes a poem about how sad he is that his penis doesn't work anymore.
That is the most Viking shit and like
Yeah.
dude shit I've heard
yeah.
in my life.
Yeah, that's the most Viking OAP thing that
Yep.
you could.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This is nice, but I can't get it up. Aw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
you know
also
what?
peeing is hard.
You know what? I sympathize with him. That's a sad day.
I mean, yeah.
It is a sad day.
So
It must be.
Bless him. That's so funny. I think that some people, for whatever reason, whether again this goes back to what you said earlier, Dan, maybe it is because that neurodivergence, what they're born with, can compartmentalize things maybe a little bit differently to other people. Because some people obviously go through trauma and you wouldn't necessarily know it on the surface because they just fucking bury it in there. They just stick it right down inside, and it never comes out until maybe one day it might maybe it never comes out. Maybe one day it comes out in some big huge event. But some people like really can just kind of carry on as if nothing has happened. And then obviously some people can't do that, and it's kind of on the sleeve, and it's takes over their life, and they can't maybe function. And maybe there's some correlation there between kind of born with and I don't know. It's interesting.
It is, but then I think a sort of another thing to think about with that is that actually sometimes it's healthier to sort of wear it on your sleeve a little bit. Talk about things, get it out there. Those people that are burying it down are often the ones that then, do just out of the blue just take their own lives.
Or they get some sort of strange physical kind of illness that no one can explain because their body is just kind of slowly withering from the inside.
Yeah.
Repressing stuff is draining.
It comes out
it
one way or
genuinely
another.
physically taps you.
Yeah, things surface one way or another. But then again, I'd be so interested to know the culture in the Viking Age of talking about things, like, because we don't know. Maybe everybody.
But don't you think it would depend on the family and the time as well?
Yeah, but maybe people just spoke about shit really openly. There wasn't like any taboo, so they all just kind of spoke about it and got it out. So there wasn't that burial. Whereas kind of modern culture, it's changing a little bit more now, but certainly went through a period of time, particularly young men, of just like shut up and suck it up, and you've got to carry it like, and we kind of automatically think of the Vikings being like these tough male figures, so they must have probably also been like that tough kind of never speak. But maybe the culture was just different, and everybody just spoke about. You came home and was like, yeah, this shit thing happened, and you just spoke about it. So there wasn't that kind of regression and the burying it. Or maybe they just fucking really buried everything down there and never let it out. I'd love to know, because I guess there's no way to really tell.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. It would be amazing to know, but people don't tend to record what's normal and everyday. you're not going to have a saga where they're like, oh yeah, and I went back and I said to my wife that I was a bit annoyed that I'd lost a goat, and it's people don't tend to record that kind of stuff. It's like when I was saying earlier that we don't have a recording of what a Viking wedding ceremony would have been, because whenever a wedding's mentioned in the saga, it's just and then there was a wedding, because everyone knows. Why do I need to write it down? No point. Now we're looking back and going, why didn't you write it down? But they wouldn't have seen the need. Like we do it now. Like if you're, if we say so and so married somebody, oh cool, that's nice. We don't go, oh, and exactly, how many steps did they take down the aisle and what music did they play? Because you just know.
Yeah, it's a great point. Well, just anything. I drove to the shops. Now, if you gave that to somebody, 500 years ago, they'd be like, what the fuck do you mean drove? You mean?
But
isn't you drove your cattle?
You like what? And no, like in a little car with an engine. But they won't even understand that, let alone.
I got the most random example like immediately as you said that too, because I was like, imagine just like either in the way future when like hygiene and everything has totally changed, or just going back to, I would assume maybe like the early 1800s or like mid 1700s even, and I'm giving a wide berth here, but imagine just saying the words, remember to brush your teeth. What the fuck does that mean? What do you mean brush my teeth? With what? Why?
Yeah.
What do you mean with with what?
Yeah.
And why would I do it?
Yeah.
There'll be. It's a great point of that. You just, if everybody knows, you don't need to go into.
Yeah, you don't record it, so that's why. Yeah, sadly for us, we'll never know what their just everyday mundane conversations were.
Wouldn't that be a fun historical, archaeologically, anthropology aligned experiment or like a research project to do if we ever do invent time travel, but there are heavy restrictions, to just go back in time and record like the things, like just to like view it from that didn't just like describe the details, like, okay, when they say wedding, like this is an example of what they mean. When they use this phrase, this is what they mean, and that was from here and that time, and just being like, here's an index over.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what we were saying earlier, I kind of like to think that their mundane conversations were like they are in Norsemen, and they were just trying to find out who was sneaking around the shitting log.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap this up, and then we'll let anybody ask you some questions if they have some. That also reminded me, Mags, I brought in that thing that I said that I was going to ask every guest, but then forgot to ask every guest. Do you remember? Was it with Roderick Dale? Or was it with? Or did we do it first with Simon? Maybe I haven't.
We did it. No, you haven't, because we've been off for a week. So I didn't mean to remind you, but you're welcome.
Yeah, you did. So we have 100% success rate.
Yeah. But you haven't asked yet, though.
No. So Dan, we this new thing that's going to last for at least 2 episodes now, where we ask our guests if they did have a time machine, what is the one thing that you would like to learn from the Viking Age? You could just pop in your little machine, go back and observe just kind of like one thing. What is it that you'd like to find out or have answered?
That's a really good question. Let me think.
Maybe we should start posing that question at the beginning of the episode and give them the episode to think about it.
Can think about it. I mean, obviously,
remembering it at the beginning of the show.
I'm trying to think. I mean, as I guess it's going to be a boring answer because it's what we've just been discussing. But just what their everyday conversations were like. Like, what did they talk about on the day to day? I think that would be so.
I don't think that's boring at all.
Yeah, it would be.
I just mean because we've just been talking about it, so it's an obvious answer,
Oh well, sure.
But I think that would be what it'd be.
That's also that would be also such a valuable thing to have, because things that come up in everyday conversation will matter for the everyday person. There will be things that are like recurring themes in society, probably.
Yeah, and they'll learn so much about people's priorities just by what they were talking about. You don't talk about things that you don't care about. So yeah.
No.
Oh, yeah, the gossip, just the mundane gossip would be great, wouldn't it? Oh, that would be brilliant. Perfect, Dan. Thank you so much for your time. Like I said, we'll let people ask you some questions.
Oh wow, yeah, we did a long one today.
We did, yeah.
Yeah.
Dan, where can people find you? Buy your book, find out more about you, I guess.
Yeah, so Instagram's the only social media platform I tend to use, so I'm at the God's Own County on there. You can buy my books. The easiest way, unfortunately, is through the evil empire that is Amazon. But if you just search Dan Coultas on Amazon, different books on there. So Heathenry in the Sea, it was kind of what I came on and talked about last time. But I've also got things like the God's Own County, a heathen prayer book. I've got children's books as well, retelling Norse myths for kids.
Oh, really?
And yeah, that's on there. So I've got a book called The Children's Edda, Volume 1. There will be a Volume 2 at some point. And there's Walking with the Gods, a heathen activity book as well. So yeah, take a look out for those.
Fun.
And I've also I've got an article in a journal, which is the International Journal of Heathen Research. So keep an eye out for that. Second volume of that should be out fairly soon as well. So yeah, and yeah, again, look me up, University of Leeds Institute for Medieval Studies. I'll be giving a paper at the International Medieval Congress next year, so come and listen to that.
Nice.
That will be on Ale Saga and Neurodivergence. So come along if you want to hear more. Come along to that.
I need to. It's so silly that I've never been to that. It's 15 minutes from me.
Yeah,
and I need to go this year. I'm gonna do it.
You mean next year?
Next year.
You should. Well, 2026. The other thing as well is I'm organising the Norse in the North conference, which is a much smaller one than the IMC. But the advantage of Norse in the North is it's free to attend, and that's also at Leeds. So keep an eye out for that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, let us know.
Yeah, I'll send you the details once we've confirmed the date and stuff.
That would be great.
Okay, Mags, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Archeomags, Archeo with a K.
There we go. For me, Daniel_Farrand1. Horns voting for the business. The new mead is launching tomorrow, so everybody keep an eye out on that. Our own mead
it's happening.
Made by me. It's had very good reviews at the shows we've taken to, so I'm really excited to kind of get it out there. And Nordic Mythology podcast across the board. There we go.